Perfectus in Mundo. Chapter 6. Written by Bobo the Hobo. Find Bobo the Hobo on DeviantArt for even more stories. And visit patreon.com/Bobo the Hobo. Pledge at a certain tier to join the exclusive Discord channel, to chat with other Weight Gain story fans, and even the hobo himself.
So, you were in another reality. And then you got really fat. And then you flipped a coin. And now you're back here?
When Kara said it, it sounded totally stupid. No matter how clearly she could have tried to explain it, Aubrey was totally unable to get across just what exactly had happened to her over the past few weeks. Probably because she herself barely understood it. She had just been so happy to have been transported to a world where her desire to be this enormous woman was not only tolerated, but encouraged, that she hadn't stopped to think too terribly much about the logistics of it all. And now, when she had to explain to her best friend why her mama and her sister were worried about her, and why she was suddenly eating everything in sight, she just sounded like a crazy person. No, Kara, I was already fat in the other, reality, or whatever you want to call it. I didn't get fat. I already was fat. Almost everybody was fat.
Was I fat?
I don't know. Probably. Aubrey hung her head in her hands as she succumbed to the realization that the one person that she had decided to tell about this strange dream come true thought that she was absolutely fucking insane. I don't think I actually got to see you while I was over there.
Rude.
She had tried to explain it as clearly and rationally as possible, and even Aubrey had to admit that she sounded way off of her rocker. There was simply no way for her to make her friend believe that what she had experienced for weeks had actually happened to her. That she really had been living life as this enormous, beautiful babe who had been eating everything she wanted and getting tons of attention from other girls, and it was so hard for her to go back to the way that things were supposed to be.
So is that why you're...
Kara pointed to the massive amount of food that Aubrey had piled in front of herself. Since she'd come back, all she had wanted to do was eat. In 3 days, she had felt like she'd done nothing but go through drive-through windows and park herself at the dinner table. Just when she had started to feel like she'd gotten used to the amount of food she'd need to eat while she was in that perfect reality, she had been ripped back into her stupid, skinny body. After only 3 days, Aubrey had grown disheveled and visibly out of sorts. Kara's eyes had gone wide when she'd seen her for the first time since her trip across space and time, because she just looked so distraught. No wonder her mother and sister were worried about her. Yeah, that's why I look like a fucking slob. Aubrey's head rose into a scowl as she skewered her pile of pancakes. It's just, I had everything I've ever wanted in life, Kara, and all of a sudden, poof, it's gone.
I know, sweetie.
Kara's tone was sympathetic, with just a touch of restraint.
But maybe we could talk about this when you're not violently stabbing plates with silverware, huh?
I'm sorry, just... Aubrey sighed. I get so hangry lately.
I really don't see how you could be hungry enough to get hangry.
Kara ventured with a small smile.
You've been stuffing your face pretty much since you sat down.
Easily the most frustrating part of all this. Now that she had the mindset of being supersized, her stupid body didn't have the ability to keep up. She'd been eating so much that she hadn't been able to keep it all down. Her stomach was so stuffed and taut even now that getting through this meal was a horrible chore. But her brain told her that she was hungry, that she had untold amounts of storage space in a tankard of a gut that was no longer attached to her body. Yeah. The words left her wistfully, like the fleeting memories of what it had been like to have been really happy for the first time in her life. There was a long, awkward pause between the two of them.
Hey!
Kara finally said,
Everything's going to be okay, okay?
And what else could Aubrey do in that situation except let her friend grip her hand and smile? Of course it was going to be okay. She didn't have much of a choice but to let it be okay. She didn't understand what had happened or why, so how was there going to be any other alternative than for her to just roll over and let it pass her by? I know, Aubrey nodded. Thanks, Kara. Getting through dinners with her family had always been something of a chore. With her mother and sister breathing down her neck about one thing or the other, Aubrey had always preferred to stay quiet. It was so much easier than trying to force conversation with either of the more extroverted members of the family. In another life, they would often just talk amongst themselves while leaving Aubrey, thankfully, out of most of their conversations. But after having gotten so used to being that person who could dominate the small talk, someone who could talk to her mother, and someone who could so easily relate to how Riley had felt, it felt so jarring to having to go back to hiding who she really felt that she was. Equally jarring for the other people at the dinner table was the fact that Aubrey was doing her best to wolf down everything in sight. "Are you sure you're okay, honey?" her mother inquired. "You never eat this much." "I'm fine, okay?" Aubrey snarled. "Just let me eat my dinner. Talk to Riley or whatever." "What did I do?" Riley asked. "We're both just worried about you, Bree." "I know you are, and it's fine." "I'm fine." Despite the fact that there was still a lot of food left on her plate, Aubrey couldn't bear to sit at the table for any longer than she absolutely had to. She couldn't have finished it all anyway, Aubrey told herself as she stood up in a huff, pushed the chair back, and stormed upstairs. For the longest time, her room had been her only solace against the world. Anytime things got tough, it had been her first instinct to go stomping up the steps. For the weeks that she had spent in her own perfect world, she'd hardly had to do it. There had been no reason. With how her mother doted over her and the way that she could dominate conversation, her weight alone had made the nightly climb up the stairs unbearable. And her appetite was so all-consuming that she'd spend much longer downstairs than she had in her native timeline. Between her blossoming dating life, the improved relationship with her mother and sister, and the various other improvements that had been made with the flip of a coin, Aubrey had barely actually seen her room in the time between transitions between reality. And now that she was back upstairs, stewing and sobbing over what could have been, she couldn't even find comfort there. The subtle differences between the world when she was fat and the world as she'd always known it had spoiled her for the old layout of her bedroom. The small changes like photographs detailing her climbing weight throughout the years, the bowing bed frame just on the brink of shattering, and even the slightly shifted mirror so as to allow Aubrey to see herself while she masturbated, had felt so insurmountable upon her return that she'd actually tried to mimic them where she could. Photoshop. Interior decorating. Even jumping up and down on the fucking bed to get that pathetic squeak from the stupid thing. Unfortunately, there was simply no coming back from this, it seemed. Aubrey's perfect world had come crashing down around her, and she wasn't quite sure how she was ever going to get used to living life the way that she was supposed to. Laying on her bed, arms spread wide, she could feel the phantom weight of her ideal body rolling and folding around her. If she closed her eyes and focused hard enough, really tried to remember what life had been like for those blessed few weeks, she could... just barely. Aha! Aubrey picked up her pillow and threw it against the door. Then she picked up another one and another one. She floundered and she thrashed over the sheets, tossing and turning and groaning and whining. Everyone in the house could hear her as she had yet another breakdown over the loss of everything that she'd ever wanted. Was it more the fantastic circumstances around her return and departure that had bothered her? If she had just understood what had happened and why it had, would she have been able to let this go? In her rage, Aubrey had slung the comforter off of the top of her bed. A loud plunk had sounded against the wall as something collided with the door. Something small but heavy. Something indiscriminate enough to have slipped between the sheets without her knowing. The sound alarmed Aubrey enough that she paused her tantrum, however momentarily, to look over at the entryway into her room. She saw a small gold disc laying at the crack of the door. Perfectus. In. Mundo. The words automatically came to her now. The words embossed onto the coin's outer edge, framing the greener pastures for which Aubrey yearned. It had been the last thing that Aubrey had seen before she had been ripped away from her perfect reality, and she hadn't seen it since. How it could have gotten between the sheets, much less stayed there despite her almost nightly outbursts, was beyond her concern. What it had been doing or why it hadn't fallen back behind the bed, Aubrey didn't care. But something in her mind clicked. A realization that the coin had something to do with slipping between realities. Suddenly, she remembered that she had flipped the coin the first time, too. All those weeks ago, just after she'd gotten back from the antique shop with Kara. She'd flipped the coin then, and as soon as she'd stepped through the doorway, things had changed. She'd ballooned into that big, perfect woman that she'd always dreamed that she could be. And it had all started with a flip of that coin. Without so much as a pause, Aubrey lunged for her prize. Colliding with the floor and facing some serious rug burn across her arms, she now held the coin in her hands. Sitting up, she held it in the light. It was very much the coin that she had picked up that day in the antique shop. It was very much the last thing that she had seen when she was big. And it was, she suspected, the very piece missing in putting the puzzle together that was her perfect world. Positioning it on her thumb once more, Aubrey primed the coin on the tip of her nail. With one quick flick of her thumb, the coin launched high into the air and landed on her outstretched palm, much the same as it had before. She took a deep breath, rose to her feet, while she still could, given the projected size increase she was expecting. She waited for a sign, a sensation, a feeling, some strange jolt of electricity that would signal to her brain that all of her dreams were on the verge of coming true once more. that she was to be transported back into that reality where she was bigger, bolder, and more beautiful than anyone else. In a strange, sudden bout of lightheadedness, Aubrey got her answer. Collapsing onto the bed, she welcomed sleep for the first time in days, and when next she woke, she would greet the day with a smile. End of chapter 6.